So what I did in my 20s, I just flowed. And that flow took me from dumb money mistake to dumb money mistake over and over again. In my 20s, I would be watching TV late at night and I would see that old guy come on the TV named Carlton Sheets. Carlton Sheets was sort of that money guru that would show up on infomercials, right? Commercials late at night where he'd be pitching his tapes and his CDs on how to buy real estate with no money down. He'd be sitting on the yacht with his wife and his family and giving us this marketing pitch about how you can be wealthy too from real estate with no money down. And so I fell for it. Hook, line, and sink. So guys, if I could go back to my 20s, I would probably slap myself, not once, not twice, probably 5 different times. Why? Because I made some really serious money mistakes when I was in my 20s. It really changed the trajectory of the rest of my life with money. These were money moves that slowed me down and slowed the progress of building wealth, slowed it down tremendously for me. So what I want to do on this video is be transparent and just talk to you guys. Hopefully I'm talking to a 20-year-old, a 25-year-old, maybe somebody in their early 30s. And I really don't want you to make the same mistakes that I made. So let me break down these 5 dumbest mistakes that I made when I was in my 20s. Guys, do me a favor, and you can relate to any of these 5 things. Drop me a comment below and feel free to share your experience. So let's jump into it. Now, the first mistake that I made in my 20s, that was a dumb mistake, was that I just kept renting and renting and renting. I didn't buy a house. I didn't buy a primary residence. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, a lot of people in their 20s don't buy a house. Well, yeah, that's true nowadays. But, 30 years ago, it was the thing to try to buy a house as soon as you could. Now, where I come from, nobody bought houses like that, right? Everybody I knew lived in apartments, or they lived in, they rented their homes and things like that. So from age 20 to age 30, I pretty much followed suit of what I was taught and what I was around. So I moved from apartment to apartment to apartment, not even thinking about a house. When I first started my 20s, up until the age of 22, I was at home. But when I got to be 22, I went and got my first apartment. I went off to college as a junior at the age of 22. And then by the age of 23, I got out of the apartments and moved to the dorm. And then I lived in a dorm for a year. Then I graduated college, and when I was 24 years old, I went and got an apartment, right? And so then from 24 to 26, I think I lived in an apartment. When I was 27, me and a buddy, we went out and rented a piece of property. In my 20s overall, I think I lived in 7 different apartments, and I rented one house with a buddy of mine for a couple of years. So I was so used to moving from apartment to apartment to apartment. That's all I did in my 20s, right? All those rent checks for a full decade, gone. No equity, no tax write-offs, no wealth building, and no ownership, just receipts. That's all I had. Now, by the time I got to be 30 years old, I finally bought my first home and my first piece of rental property. But I spent a decade of not doing any of that, right? I missed a whole decade of building some generational wealth and getting some appreciation. So what did I learn? Here's the lesson I learned really through that. Ownership builds equity. Equity builds net worth. But here's the kicker. Ownership also builds experience and learning opportunities and growth. So you can rent. Renting's cool. I'm not mad at you. If you're renting right now, I'm not mad at you. But renting should be something you do for a short period of time. You don't want to make renting a lifestyle because it's going to keep you in a cycle, right? Building wealth through one avenue called home ownership, that's still an okay thing. I know we live in a society nowadays where a lot of people say, well, you shouldn't, I don't have to buy a home. And I think I read a story last week in some publication that said that the average age that people are buying their first home is now, late 30s, whereas 40 or 50 years ago, it was more like in their mid 20s, right? So people are waiting before they buy their first home, and that's cool, nothing wrong with that. But I'm telling you now, home ownership still works as an avenue to really get started with this wealth building process. It's still an acceptable way to add hundreds of thousands of dollars to your net worth. Now, the second thing that I did in my 20s that was just dumb, it was really dumb, is I invested way too little for way too long. Let me explain what I mean. When I graduated from college, when I was 24 years old, I came right out of college and I became a teacher, a school teacher, right? I taught 7th grade. So from age 24 to age 30, I had an opportunity to really max out my retirement plan and put a lot of money, and I didn't, right? Looking back on that, that was a mistake. It was a big mistake, because really that trend of not investing as much as I probably should be investing, that trend really lasted through my mid to late 30s as well. But it was a trend that was started when I was about 24 years old. I just did the bare minimum. I invested what they took out of my check as a teacher. You get a state teacher 403B plan in most states in America. I just invested whatever they took out. I didn't go above and beyond, right? I invested just enough to get by, right? No plan, no vision, no looking down the road 20 years. I was just kind of just doing what they told me to do, working off of somebody else's plan for my financial life. Big mistake. Oh yeah, I learned about compound interest, and I even learned about the compound interest tables. I learned that when I was about 25 years old. I had an insurance guy that came to my classroom after school, and he was going to all the teachers to try to get us to sign up for some annuities and stuff, and he showed me some compound interest tables, and I'm like, wow, this is cool. I was like 24, 25 years old, but I didn't really take that next step. Right? I didn't apply this new knowledge that he gave me and that I was kind of seeing here and there. I didn't really apply it in a real way. I didn't really understand Roth IRAs. I didn't ask any questions, and I didn't have anybody around me who understood or knew about this stuff, right? This was just me in the middle of nowhere, getting a little bit of information from here and there, because if I had maxed out my 20s, let's say I put 15 or 20% towards my 403B at the time, or did some other investing at the time, today I'd probably have twice as much. I'd probably be a multi-millionaire at this point had I done that right in those early years, because I didn't really understand the importance of those early years, right? Age, say, 24 for me until I was about 38, 39 years old. 15, 16 years of putting in the bare minimum into retirement, whatever I was told to put in. When I got another job in my early 30s, I started working for the federal government. I just put in 3 or 4% into the thrift savings plan. So all those years I spent, and it started in my early 20s, all those years, I just didn't put in enough money. I didn't stretch myself. I didn't understand the importance of compound interest. I knew it existed, but I didn't really activate it fully, right? Now, the lesson that I kind of got, and I get lessons from each of these dumb mistakes, right? There's lessons to be learned from each one of them. So what I learned by not investing enough at an early age, you can't really build wealth or reach the top of anything by just doing the bare minimum, right? You got to start early, and you got to go hard, and let time do its thing when it comes to your money and your wealth. The sooner you let compound interest go to work on your money, and you get out of the way and let compound interest and time do their thing, all you really got to do is be consistent and stretch yourself a little bit along the way, right? Don't just do the bare minimum, go above and beyond. If you go above and beyond today, you'll feel the results tomorrow. When you put in the bare minimum, you're going to get out the bare minimum, right? The output is not going to increase unless the input increases. Guys, if you're getting anything out of this video, do me a favor and smash that like button below. Also, please share this video with your friends, your family, and your network of people. And don't forget to drop that comment below. I want to hear from you. And if you're not a subscriber to this channel, please consider subscribing to my channel. Now, let's get back to the video. Now, the third dumb mistake I made in my 20s was I took out these student loans and I didn't use them for school. I used a little bit of it for school, but not a lot. I used them to live, to pay rent, to go out, to do things that had nothing to do with tuition and room and board, or books for that matter, right? I used it for that too, but I had a whole bunch of extra money left over after I got student loans. In other words, I got too many student loans. Now, when I got out of college in 1994, I had $25,000 in student loans. And you're probably saying to yourself, well, that's nothing. Think about this now. We're talking about 31 years ago. $25,000 31 years ago is a whole lot different than $25,000 today. And so that was a ton of money. And I would say probably more than half of that money I didn't even need for my college tuition. I just kept that money to go along with my little money I was making on the side working at Wendy's when I was 22 and 23 years old. and then working in the summertime sometimes as a tutor, right? Made a little bit of money doing those things. But I used my student loan money for stuff other than school. Now, if you can relate to that, do me a favor and let me know in the comments below that you've done that too, or you know somebody who's done that, right? A lot of folks do it, right? So taking out more loans than I actually needed was a problem. And believe it or not, guys, here's the problem with that. That student loan combined with my wife's student loan in the year 2000, put those two student loans together, and they both were about $25,000 for a total of $50,000. We didn't pay those off until the year 2021. So that $25,000 that I first got in 1992, I didn't pay it off for nearly 30 years later, around 30 years later. That's a long time holding on to a student loan, half of which didn't even go towards school. Huge mistake, and it affected me up until just a few years ago. Now, the lesson I learned from that is debt with no purpose is just pretty much weight around your neck. There's no need for it. Student loans are not free money. What they really are is student loans are really just future stress. And so for me, guys, I kind of learned my lesson with student loans. So when my kids were going to school, I said, we're not filling out no FAFSA. We're not taking out no student loans. We're not doing none of that. We're going to do what we can to pay cash. You're going to work. You're going to get scholarships. I'm going to work a little extra. We're going to pay in. We're not going to get student loans. So I put 2 of my 3 kids through college with no student loans. They did a lot of work too. It wasn't just me doing all the work. They did a lot of work as well. Then my oldest son, he went to college later on in life on his own. But the point is this. I wanted my kids to go to college, but I didn't want them to make the same mistakes I made when it came to student loans. So I said, you know what, when I got a little older and they were about to go to college, I said, we're not going to make this mistake. I'm not going to have you in debt the way I was in debt. I know a lot of you are just now getting into investing. So I wanted to share with you an app that I've been using and I like. It's called Moomoo. It's super easy to use, very beginner friendly, but Moomoo still gives you those pro level tools like live market data, easy to read charts, and news on your favorite stocks all in one place on Moomoo. Now the best part is new users to Moomoo can get up to 60 free stocks when you open up an account. If you open an account at Moomoo and make a $100 deposit, you'll get 5 free stocks. If you make a $2,000 deposit, you get 25 free stocks. And if you make a $5,000 deposit when you open up your Moomoo account, you get 60 free stocks. That's one of the reasons I tried it, because I wanted to get my free stocks. Now listen, this is a limited time promotion only. So if you're interested in Moomoo, click on the first link in the description box below and sign up to get your free stocks at Moomoo today. Now the 4th huge dumb mistake that I made in my 20s was I bought used cars with big used car payments. Look, so I went to college in 1992 about 3 hours away. And at the age of 22, I had no car loan, right? Didn't have a car loan, no car I was responsible for to make a payment on, none of that. I spent my junior and senior years of college at the ages of 22 and 23 and almost 24. I spent those years with pretty much no car, right? On campus. Right? I was on a mission to get out of college. I was using those student loans to try to get out of college. In 1994, I was dating a young lady, and her mom knew I didn't have a car, and I was about to go be a teacher. Her mom bought me a small 1977 Toyota Corolla stick shift. And I can still remember me and a buddy of mine driving it back to my home city from my college town in the summer of 1994. And it was about 3 hours away, and we made it all the way back to my city, and the car went out. We took it to the car wash, and the car went out, wouldn't start. I had to jump start it, you know, where you put it in gear and you roll it down a hill and you jump it. I had to do that, and we had a good time laughing. He was laughing at it, and he was teasing me about it. It was crazy, but it's the only car I had. And so soon after that, about 6 months later, that car barely made it around for a while, but it made it. 6 months later, in about 1995, beginning of 1995, I bought me a 1992 Taurus, Ford Taurus. Had car payments. It was only a 2 or 3 year old car. Then around 1998, I had that car for about 3 or 4 years. About 3 years. 1998, that car got stolen, and I replaced it in 1998 with a 1996 Honda Civic. I had big payments on that too. So I spent the latter half of my 20s with car payments. And really, I had a car payment up until my early 30s. So I started my 20s with no car payment, and I ended my 20s with a car payment. Here's the lesson. A car should get you from point A to point B, not put you in debt for 5 years or 6 years. In other words, don't finance your lifestyle. It's not worth it. Own whatever you need to own outright. Now, if it's a house and it's going up in value, cool. You can make payments on a house, not a big deal, or a piece of rental property. But if it's a car, don't make the mistake I made, the dumb mistake of having car payment after car payment after car payment for years, probably 15 years, from age 25 up until my late 30s. Car payment after car payment. Don't do it. It's not worth it. Now, the fifth dumb mistake that I made with money, and I admit it, these are all dumb, is I didn't know anything about money, and I didn't learn anything about money. I didn't read the money books. I didn't watch the finance videos, or which back then it wasn't really videos, right? You had to go read. So I wasn't really dumb, but I didn't make strides to make myself more informed. I was living my 20s like I was taught to live my 20s. And in order to do something different, I had to recondition the way I think. I had to change my mindset, right? Nobody handed me financial education. I didn't come from a background where my father sat me down and taught me this, and my mother taught me this lesson. I didn't have lessons about finances being taught to me, so I had to go learn them. And the mistake I made in my 20s is I wasn't looking for them, right? Now, you may say that's not a mistake. You didn't know what you didn't know. Totally true, right? But I'm a big believer in personal responsibility. I'm a big believer in if you have a problem or an issue, the reason you have that problem or issue is because you're not taking the power of personal responsibility to fix that issue. So what I did in my 20s, I just flowed. And that flow took me from dumb money mistake to dumb money mistake over and over again in my 20s. Now, it wasn't until I was about 29 years old when I would be watching TV late at night and I would see that old guy come on the TV named Carlton Sheets. Now, who was Carlton Sheets, right? I think he since passed away, right, several years ago. But Carlton Sheets was sort of that money guru that would show up on infomercials, right? Commercials late at night where he'd be pitching his tapes and his CDs on how to buy real estate with no money down. He'd be sitting on the yacht with his wife and his family and giving us this marketing pitch about how you can be wealthy too from real estate with no money down. And so I fell for it, hook, line, and sink. Some of you may be saying, well, Carlton Sheets was a fraud, a scam. Maybe, but it motivated me. So it motivated me to start learning, to start seeking out opportunities. Because before I was 30 years old, I had never even lived in a piece of property owned by anybody I knew. I grew up in apartments and rental houses, and most places I lived, and I lived probably a good 15 different places. Most of them, by the time I was in my late 20s, had been torn down, right? I lived in the inner city of the inner city. But those infomercials, those commercials, they somehow sparked something in me that made me say, you know what? I think I can do that too. Wait a minute. Let me see how this makes sense to me. And I started thinking about it. Lo and behold, when I turned 30 years old, I got my first primary piece of real estate to live in. And I went out and bought my first piece of rental property at the age of 30. And so that dreaming and that thinking, it kicked into action. And ultimately, that action kicked into confidence and kicked into self-esteem, and that kicked into more action and more action. And by the time I was 35 years old, I had bought 6 rental properties. It all started with a little bit of motivation on the outside, Carlton Sheets infomercials, commercials on TV, to me actually doing something and believing and gaining some courage to go out and try. Right? With some studying, with some learning, with some meeting new people, I just would open up the phone book and start calling people, calling real estate into ours, right? Remember the old phone book? You open it up and you hit to go to real estate. Hey, there's a real estate broker not far from me. There's a real estate broker. So I called a bunch of them. Lo and behold, I hooked up with one of them, and he ended up selling me his piece of property that he was about to sell and get rid of. He sold it to me owner financed for $10,000 in the year 2000. That was my first piece of rental property. So here's the lesson in that. The lesson in that is this. You don't have to be a genius. All you really got to do is be intentional. All you really got to do is have some courage. All you really got to do is have some vision and actually do something, right? Learn a little bit every day and put what you're thinking and what you're learning into practice. That's how you break cycles. So for me, as I entered into my 30s, I entered into my 30s sort of in a different way, in a way that said, you know what, everything is possible. The change in the mindset when I was 29, 30 years old is what made my 30s a little bit better. And that made my 40s even better. Then I kept at it, and now I'm in my 50s and I'm looking at wealth. Listen, if you're in your 20s right now, or even your early 30s right now, please hear me. You don't need to learn by bumping your head and making a whole bunch of mistakes, right? You don't have to learn the hard way, like I did. Start with intention, get confidence, consistency, and persistence. And don't just make money, but learn how to think money and manage money, build money, grow money. Oftentimes, the biggest risk is the risk that you don't take. I hope you got some value out of my 5 dumbest mistakes I made in my 20s. If you got value out of this quick video, do me a favor, smash that like button. But most of all, share this video with somebody who you know that probably could use this information. Drop a comment if you've made one of these mistakes or if you have a similar story. Drop it in the comments below. Until the next video, peace.